So Devon, welcome back to the course.
Thank you.
We're looking now at how to identify auditory processing disorder. Can I perhaps start by asking, what are the symptoms?
Well, the symptoms are varied, but the most common ones we find for most people with auditory processing disorder, the major difficulty most people have is hearing and processing what they hear, particularly language and speech, when there is any form of background noise. So it really interferes, background noise really interferes with their processing ability. So it's a very quiet environment, one-on-one, they do quite well, but put them in a noisy classroom or, say, a party, and they have a huge amount of difficulty processing what's heard with background noise.
So you've just given me two extremes, the loud environment and the quiet environment. Can they still struggle in the in-between or in the grey areas?
Absolutely. For some students, even a small amount of background noise can really interfere with their processing. It can be as subtle as an air conditioning unit or a fan in the background can be enough to affect the way that they're able to process what they're hearing.
So, and that's registered as a distraction of sorts, is it? I would take it.
Well, it just interferes with the processing of the speech signal. So they're listening to the teacher speaking, but any amount of other noise is going to impact on their ability to take in what the teacher's saying.
Right. Just trying to understand all this is actually giving me somewhat of a headache. It seems quite complicated. Do the sufferers of this condition also suffer from physiological responses like headaches and things like that?
What is the major sort of issue particularly for students in a classroom with auditory processing disorder? What they have to do all day, every day, is work really hard to keep listening. They've got to put in so much energy just to keep listening. So that at the end of the school day, they are absolutely exhausted. So then you're asking them to then perhaps do homework after they've sat through a school day. So I use the analogy of asking them to do homework is asking them to run another 10 Ks when they've just run a marathon.
Right. It's funny you should say that, because the end of the school day, there's a lot of noise as they're all running for bags and running through corridors and going for lockers, etc. Could that last burst of noise in a day really just add that last little bit of frustration to them? Not
particularly, because at that time of day they're not being required to listen and learn. So it's when that background noise is interfering in a learning situation, when they've got to listen and take in teacher instruction. So at the end of the day, when learning for the day is over, that kind of noise isn't really going to be a major problem for their learning, but it could be a problem if their mates talking to them and they don't quite get what their mate says. One of the other, there are a lot of different aspects to auditory processing. One subtle one that we often don't see very easily is when the student has difficulty perceiving the non-linguistic aspects of communication, particularly tone of voice. And so if you've got a particular aspect of auditory processing disorder where you don't get that if I change my tone of voice, I'm actually changing the meaning, that is hugely difficult in social situations. So these are the children that don't get jokes. They don't get when their friends are being sarcastic. They can take things very literally. They can misinterpret the intention of what's being said. And so they are very easily insulted.
Right, yeah.
And so these are the kids that have a lot of social difficulty with communication, because their auditory processing disorder is impacting on their ability to interpret the meaning or the intent of what's said. So for example, if I say to a student, gee, that was smart, or I say, that was smart, I've used exactly the same words,
it's a very subtle difference.
My second one is being sarcastic.
Yes.
Now, certain people with an aspect of auditory processing, that is a huge problem for them. And they're often the children with social skills problems, directly relating to their auditory processing disorder.
That's interesting because it seems that symptoms can be social rather than just purely medical, as we would say.
For some students with a particular form of auditory processing disorder, the one where we're having a lot more difficulty with perceiving differences in tone of voice is thought to be related to more a difficulty in the right hemisphere, where the right hemisphere is more involved with that interpretation of tone of voice and the ups and downs. These children can often have a very speak almost in a monotone, because not only do they have trouble perceiving those prosodic features or changes in tone, they don't usually have good tone in their own voice. So those kids that talk like this all the time and they really talk at a monotone,
yes,
that can also be an indicator that they have a certain aspect of auditory processing disorder.
Right. So we've talked about background noise levels, perception of tone and that sort of thing. There's got to be some others. What are they?
Many others, actually. One of the major difficulties for students with a particular cluster of auditory processing difficulties impacts on their development of reading and spelling. For example, if you have a lot of difficulty discriminating between speech sounds, auditory discrimination, so you can't hear the difference between a p and a b or a t and a d, you have a huge amount of difficulty then not only developing your oral language and understanding what's said to you, but that ability to hear sounds in words very much relates to the development of reading and spelling skills. So many children with literacy difficulties, a major contributor to their difficulties is their poor auditory processing in their ability to perceive speech sounds and to process speech sounds.
Right.
Now, that doesn't apply to everybody with an auditory processing difficulty, but for some children it is a major contributing factor to their literacy difficulties.
Okay.
Other issues that can happen are some students might have difficulty with the location of sound. I can't hear where the sound, or I can't detect where the sound is coming from.
So they can't zero in, so to speak.
That's right. So if there's a classroom discussion, they have a lot of difficulty following that discussion because they can't shift their attention easily from one speaker to another.
Right, so that would be kind of a double-pronged thing, because if there's just general noise in the classroom, they can't zero in on anything. And then if there is a discussion which is organised, they still can't zero in on anything.
That's right, because they have trouble with localising where the signal's coming from.
That must be quite distressing.
Another major symptom that teachers would be seeing is the children that just don't remember what they say. So
Right.
They can't follow an instruction or follow a lengthy instruction. They can't remember. They might remember the last 3 words that the teacher said, but they can't remember any of the beginning of the instruction. And we know so much of classroom instruction is verbal. So these children just miss so much of what they hear.
Yes, okay. Well, that sounds like we're sort of starting to talk about assessments, which I believe is the subject for our next topic.
Very good.
Devon, thank you.
My pleasure.